The bitter wind cut through Billy Smith's threadbare coat as she hurried down the icy streets of Chicago's South Side after finishing her third cleaning shift of the day. Her fingers, still aching from scrubbing floors in the downtown office building, clutched $23 in crumpled bills, not nearly enough to cover the rent that was already 2 weeks overdue or the doctor's visit Mary desperately needed. The streetlights flickered overhead, some long burned out, casting uneven shadows across the snow-covered sidewalk as Billy turned onto Ashland Avenue toward home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. The words made her blood freeze. Mary collapsed outside the building. "Can't get her up. Been calling you for 10 minutes. Billy ran, her worn shoes slipping on ice, her lungs burning in the frigid air. 3 blocks had never felt so endless. When she rounded the corner to their building, she saw them, Mrs. Johnson kneeling beside a small form on the sidewalk, other neighbors hovering at a distance, and Mary, her baby, lying motionless on the frozen concrete. "Mary." Billy dropped to her knees, her hands finding her daughter's face, her neck, checking for a pulse the way she'd learned from those first aid pamphlets at the community center. Mary's skin was cold, too cold, her lips tinged with blue. Her eyes fluttered open slightly. "Mama," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I just got so dizzy." "How long has she been out here?" Billy demanded, pulling off her own coat to wrap around Mary despite the cold cutting through her thin work uniform. "Maybe 15 minutes, Mrs. Johnson said, wringing her hands. "She was walking home from school and just went down. I couldn't lift her by myself." Billy's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, her vision blurring with tears as she tried to dial 911, but panic made her fingers clumsy. She hit wrong numbers, had to start over, finally pressed what she thought was the emergency number and held the phone to her ear. "Who is this, and how did you get this number?" The voice that answered was not a dispatcher. It was male, cold, authoritative, with an edge that suggested whoever she'd reached was accustomed to immediate answers and absolute obedience. Billy's mind went blank for half a second, then desperation overrode everything else. "Please," she gasped out, her voice breaking. "My daughter collapsed on the street and she can't stand. She's freezing and I don't know what's wrong and I need help right now." There was a pause, so brief Billy almost missed it. Then the voice, slightly less cold but no less commanding. "Your exact address, now." "Ashland and 47th, outside the brick apartment building with the blue door," Billy said, the words tumbling out. "Please hurry, she's so cold." "Do not move her. Do not call anyone else. I'm sending help. 8 minutes." The line went dead before Billy could ask who he was or explain she'd misdialed. Mrs. Johnson stared at her. "Who was that? That wasn't 911. "I don't know," Billy whispered, pulling Mary closer, trying to share what little warmth her body had left. "I hit the wrong number, but he said help is coming." If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we continue bringing these stories to life. 7.5 minutes later, Billy heard the sound of engines, smooth and powerful, completely out of place in her neighborhood where most people rode the bus. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up to the curb with precision that suggested military training. 4 men emerged, moving with coordinated purpose, 2 taking positions scanning the street while 2 approached. The first man was built like a wall, with sharp eyes that assessed everything. But it was the second man who made Billy's breath catch. Tall and imposing in a wool overcoat that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent, he moved with quiet authority. His silver-threaded hair perfectly styled, his face all sharp angles and hard experience. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept the scene before settling on Mary with an expression Billy couldn't quite read. He knelt in the snow beside them without hesitation, his expensive coat soaking up the wet slush. His hands, surprisingly gentle, checked Mary's pulse at her neck, her wrist, felt her forehead. "When did she last eat a full meal?" he asked, his voice the same one from the phone but with the coldness slightly tempered. Billy felt shame burn through her chest, hotter than any winter wind. "Yesterday morning. I gave her half my sandwich before her school." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked up at the larger man standing behind him. "Marcus, get the car warmed up and call Dr. Chen. Tell him to prep a bed and have IV glucose ready. Severe malnutrition and dehydration, possible hypothermia." He turned back to Billy, and for the first time she saw his face clearly in the streetlight. Strong, weathered, with eyes that had seen things she couldn't imagine. "I'm going to pick her up now. You're coming with us. My facility is 12 minutes from here. She needs immediate care." "I don't even know who you are," Billy said, but her protest was weak, because Mary's breathing was too shallow, and her lips were too blue, and nothing else mattered. "My name is Harold Delgado," the man said, lifting Mary as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. "And right now, I'm the only chance your daughter has." The name hit Billy like a physical blow. Harold Delgado. Everyone in Chicago knew that name, whispered it with fear and respect. The South Side's most powerful figure, the man who controlled territories and commanded loyalty through means Billy didn't want to imagine. She'd accidentally called a mafia boss. And now he was carrying her daughter toward his SUV, where Marcus was holding the door open. "Are you coming, Mr. Smith?" Harold asked, not turning around. "Or do you want to wait for an ambulance that might arrive in 40 minutes and take her to an ER where she'll wait another 3 hours to be seen?" Billy looked at Mary's pale face, at the man holding her daughter with surprising care, at the warm vehicle with heated seats visible through the open door. Every instinct screamed that getting into that SUV was dangerous, that accepting help from Harold Delgado came with a price she couldn't imagine paying. But Mary's lips were blue and her breathing was shallow, and nothing, absolutely nothing, mattered more than keeping her daughter alive. Billy stood on shaking legs and climbed into the SUV, sealing her fate and stepping into a world she never imagined entering. As the door closed and the vehicle pulled smoothly away from her neighborhood, Harold Delgado wrapped a heated blanket around Mary and spoke quietly into his phone. His words clipped and authoritative, arranging immediate medical care with an efficiency that suggested he was accustomed to handling crises. Billy sat rigid in her seat, watching this dangerous stranger care for her daughter, and wondered what price she would have to pay for this help. She wondered if she'd just made a deal with the devil. But as Mary's breathing steadied slightly in the warmth of the car, Billy knew she'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. Sometimes desperation makes you brave. Sometimes it makes you reckless. And sometimes it changes absolutely everything. Welcome to Billy and Harold's story. If that opening already has your heart racing, you're in the right place. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below, and please subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This journey is just beginning. Now, let's get back to the story. The fluorescent lights of the Sterling Tower office building hummed overhead as Billy Smith wrung out her mop for the last time that night. 3:45 a.m. Her back ached from 6 hours of scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. Her shoulders screamed from reaching to clean windows, and her hands were cracked and bleeding from the harsh industrial chemicals. She peeled off her rubber gloves and counted the cash her supervisor had handed her with barely a glance. $42 for 6 hours of work, paid under the table because the cleaning company preferred workers they didn't have to report to anyone. $42. Rent was $900 and she was already 2 weeks late, with the landlord's increasingly threatening notes slipped under her door. Mary needed new shoes desperately because her toes were pushing through the front of her current pair, the ones Billy had bought at the thrift store 3 months ago. The electric bill was overdue, and they'd been stretching a single bag of rice and 2 packages of chicken thighs across an entire week because that was all the last paycheck could cover after keeping the heat on. Billy pulled her threadbare coat tighter as she stepped into the bitter Chicago pre-dawn. The wind off the lake cut through the thin fabric like knives. She walked 4 blocks to catch the first bus, then transferred to another, finally arriving in her Southside neighborhood just after 5 a.m. Every muscle in her body begged for sleep, but she had exactly 3 hours before she needed to be at the diner for the breakfast rush. Her phone buzzed as she turned onto Ashland Avenue. Mrs. Johnson. Then it buzzed again, and again. Billy's heart seized with instant dread as she answered. "Billy, thank God." Mrs. Johnson's voice was high with panic. "Mary collapsed outside the building. She's been lying on the sidewalk for nearly 15 minutes and I can't get her up. I've been calling you." Billy didn't hear the rest. She was already running, her exhausted legs finding energy from pure terror. 3 blocks had never seemed so far. Her worn shoes slipped on patches of ice. Her lungs burned in the frozen air, but she pushed harder, faster, until she could see the small crowd of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk and the tiny form lying motionless on the concrete. "Mary!" Billy crashed to her knees beside her daughter, her hands immediately going to Mary's face, her neck, checking for a pulse the way she'd learned from the free first aid class at the community center. The pulse was there, but weak and thready. Mary's skin felt like ice. Her lips had a blue tinge that made Billy's stomach drop, and her whole small body was trembling despite being wrapped in Mrs. Johnson's coat. Mary's eyes fluttered open at her mother's touch. "Mama," she whispered, her voice so small and weak it shattered Billy's heart into pieces. "I'm sorry. I just got so dizzy. I tried to make it home, but my legs wouldn't work anymore." "How long, baby? How long have you been feeling like this?" Billy demanded, already knowing she wouldn't want to hear the answer. "A few days," Mary admitted, tears sliding down her cold cheeks. "But I didn't want to worry you. I know we can't afford the doctor." Days. Her 12-year-old daughter had been suffering for days and said nothing because she understood their impossible situation too well. "How long has she been lying here?" Billy asked Mrs. Johnson, her voice shaking as badly as her hands. 15 minutes, maybe more. She was walking home from school and just collapsed. I couldn't lift her by myself, and I've been trying to reach you." Billy was already fumbling for her phone, her numb fingers barely able to grip it. 911. She just needed to dial 911. But her hands were shaking so badly her vision blurred with tears, and she kept hitting the wrong numbers. She tried again, pressed what she desperately hoped was the right combination, and held the phone to her ear. "Who is this, and how did you get this number?" The voice that answered was not a dispatcher. It was male, cold, authoritative, with an edge of danger that would have terrified her under any other circumstances. Billy's mind went completely blank for half a second, but then desperation obliterated everything else. Fear, protocol, common sense. "Please," she gasped out, her voice breaking on a sob. "My daughter collapsed on the street and she can't stand. She's freezing and I don't know what's wrong and I need help right now, please. I'm begging you." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then, "Your exact address. Now. Don't waste time." "Ashland and 47th, Billy said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Outside the brick apartment building with the blue door. Please hurry, she's so cold. Do not move her. Do not call anyone else. I'm sending help. 8 minutes." The line went dead before Billy could ask who he was or explain that she'd misdialed. Mrs. Johnson was staring at her with wide eyes. "Who was that?" "That wasn't 911. "I don't know," Billy whispered, pulling Mary closer against her chest, trying desperately to share what little warmth her exhausted body had left. "I hit the wrong number, but he said help is coming." 7.5 minutes later, Billy counted every excruciating second. The sound of smooth, powerful engines echoed down the street, completely out of place in a neighborhood where most people took the bus. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up to the curb with military precision. 4 men emerged, moving with coordinated purpose that spoke of training and discipline. 2 immediately taking positions to scan the street, while 2 approached the small group huddled on the sidewalk. The first man was built like a wall, with sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. But it was the second man who made Billy's breath catch in her throat. Tall and imposing in a wool overcoat that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent, he moved with quiet, absolute authority. His hair was silver-threaded and perfectly styled, his face all sharp angles and hard experience, and his eyes, dark, intelligent, dangerous, swept the scene with professional assessment before settling on Mary with an expression Billy couldn't quite read. Without hesitation, without concern for his expensive coat, he knelt in the slush beside them. His hands, surprisingly gentle for someone who radiated such controlled power, checked Mary's pulse at her neck, her wrist, felt her forehead with careful precision. "When did she last eat a full meal?" he asked quietly, his voice the same one from the phone but with the coldness slightly softened by something that might have been concern. Billy felt shame burn through her chest, hotter than any winter wind, more painful than any physical injury. "Yesterday morning," she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. "I gave her half of my sandwich before school." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked up at the larger man standing behind him. "Marcus, get the primary vehicle warmed up immediately and call Dr. Chen. Tell him to prep a private room and have IV glucose ready. We're looking at severe malnutrition, dehydration, and possible hypothermia." He turned back to Billy, and in the harsh streetlight she finally saw his face clearly. Strong, weathered, with eyes that had seen things she couldn't begin to imagine and carried weights she would never understand. "I'm going to pick her up now," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You're coming with us. My medical facility is 12 minutes from here. Your daughter needs immediate care that she won't get anywhere else fast enough." "I don't even know who you are," Billy said, but her protest was weak because Mary's breathing was too shallow and her lips were too blue, and nothing else in the world mattered except keeping her baby alive. The man lifted Mary as if she weighed nothing at all, cradling her carefully against his chest, already turning toward the waiting vehicle where Marcus held the door open. "My name is Harold Delgado," he said without looking back, "and right now, Mr. Smith, I'm the only chance your daughter has." The name hit Billy like a physical blow, stealing what little breath she had left. Harold Delgado. Everyone in Chicago knew that name, spoke it in whispers mixed with fear and respect. The man who controlled the South Side, who commanded absolute loyalty, whose reputation was built on power and ruthlessness and 1,000 dark rumors. She'd accidentally called a Mafia boss. And now he was carrying her dying daughter toward his SUV. "Are you coming, Mrs. Smith?" Harold asked, pausing at the vehicle door, still not turning around. "Or would you prefer to wait for an ambulance that might arrive in 40 minutes and take her to an emergency room where she'll wait another 3 hours to be seen by an overworked intern?" Billy looked at Mary's pale face, at the powerful man holding her daughter with unexpected care, at the warm vehicle with heated seats visible through the open door. Every instinct she'd developed through years of surviving in a world that didn't care about people like her screamed that getting into that SUV was dangerous, that accepting help from Harold Delgado would come with a price she couldn't begin to imagine paying. But Mary's lips were blue, and her breathing was too shallow, and her small body was still trembling despite being wrapped in Harold's expensive coat. And nothing, absolutely nothing, mattered more than keeping her daughter alive. Billy stood on shaking legs and climbed into the SUV, knowing she was sealing her fate and stepping into a world she'd never imagined entering. The private medical facility was nothing like any hospital Billy had ever seen. No crowded waiting room with broken chairs and flickering fluorescent lights. No harried staff ignoring desperate families for hours. Instead, the SUV pulled directly into an underground garage, and Mary was immediately transferred to a gurney where 3 medical professionals in pristine scrubs were already waiting. "Dr. Chen," Harold said simply, and a silver-haired man with kind eyes and capable hands took over, asking rapid-fire questions while checking Mary's vitals. Within 90 seconds, they were moving through pristine hallways, and Billy had to jog to keep up. "Severe dehydration and malnutrition," Dr. Chen said crisply, already inserting an IV line into Mary's arm with practiced efficiency. "Blood sugar is dangerously low, possible vitamin deficiencies. We'll run a full panel." "How long has she been symptomatic?" "She said a few days," Billy answered, her voice breaking. "But I think it's been longer. I work 3 jobs. I didn't see—" "You're here now," Dr. Chen said, his tone softening slightly. "We'll take care of her." They wheeled Mary into a private room that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital, all warm lighting and comfortable furniture. Billy watched them work, connecting monitors, adjusting the IV drip, covering Mary with heated blankets. Her daughter's eyes were closed now, her breathing steadier, some color already returning to her lips. Harold appeared at Billy's elbow. "The waiting room is more comfortable. Dr. Chen will update you as soon as he has results." The waiting room had leather couches, fresh coffee, and windows overlooking the city. Billy couldn't sit. She paced, her mind spinning with terror and confusion and desperate hope. Harold stood near the window making quiet phone calls, his presence somehow both threatening and oddly reassuring. An hour later, Dr. Chen emerged. "She's stable, severely malnourished and dehydrated as suspected, with vitamin D and iron deficiencies. But with proper treatment and nutrition, she'll make a full recovery." Billy's legs gave out. She caught herself on the arm of a couch, tears streaming down her face as relief crashed through her like a wave. "Thank you," she gasped. "Thank you so much." Dr. Chen smiled gently. "She'll need to stay here for at least 3 days for monitoring and nutritional support. After that, continued care and proper meals." After he left, Harold gestured to a door. "My office. We need to talk." The office was all dark wood and leather, with books lining the walls and a massive desk that probably cost more than Billy made in a year. Harold sat behind it, his expression unreadable, and gestured for her to take the chair across from him. "Your daughter will recover," he began without preamble. "But Dr. Chen's assessment is clear. She needs weeks of proper nutrition, monitoring, and care. The public hospital would stabilize her and send her back to the same conditions that made her sick. Then you'd be back here in a month. Or worse." Billy's hands clenched in her lap. She knew he was right. "I'm going to make you an offer," Harold continued. "I run several legitimate community outreach programs in neighborhoods like yours. Food banks, after-school programs, job training. They need proper management. You'll work for me, managing these operations. The salary is $65,000 a year, plus benefits and housing." Billy's mind went blank. 65,000. That was more than all 3 of her jobs combined, more money than she'd ever dreamed of making. "In exchange," Harold said, his dark eyes holding hers, "Mary receives full medical care through my private physicians. You and she move into safe, clean housing that I provide. You work competently and professionally, and you exercise discretion about what you see and hear in my organization." Billy's survival instincts finally kicked in past the shock. "What's the real cost?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Men like you don't help people like me out of kindness. What do you actually want?" Something flickered in Harold's expression, almost like respect. Your discretion about what you see, as I said, and your actual competence in running these programs. I don't hire charity cases, Mrs. Smith. I hire people who can do the work. Can you? I've been managing impossible situations my entire life, Billy said, lifting her chin. I think I can handle your food banks. Harold slid a contract across the desk. Billy read every word, her hands shaking, looking for the trap. But it was straightforward. Employment terms, salary, benefits, housing allowance, Mary's medical coverage. Nothing about owing him, nothing about repayment, nothing that screamed danger beyond the obvious fact that she'd be working for Harold Delgado. Why? She finally asked. Why would you do this? Harold was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. I lost my daughter 5 years ago, he said, his voice carefully controlled. She was 14. Car accident in crossfire from a territorial dispute I should have prevented. He met Billy's gaze again. I don't expect you to trust me, Mrs. Smith, but I will keep Mary safe. That much I can promise. Billy saw genuine pain in his eyes, the kind that never fully heals. She thought about Mary lying in that hospital bed, about the choice between pride and survival, about how sometimes desperation makes you brave, and sometimes it just makes you realistic. She picked up the pen and signed her name, knowing everything was about to change. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, actual heat that worked, and windows that locked properly. Billy stood in the middle of the empty living room the first morning, still unable to believe it was real. Mary emerged from her bedroom, stronger after 5 days in Harold's medical facility, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the space that was triple the size of their old place. Mama, there's a bathtub, Mary said, her voice filled with awe. A real bathtub, and the water gets hot. Billy felt tears sting her eyes. Her 12-year-old daughter was amazed by basic plumbing that should have been a fundamental right, not a luxury. Within a week, Mary had gained 6 pounds. The hollow look had left her cheeks, and she smiled more than Billy had seen in years. New school supplies covered the kitchen table, fresh groceries filled the refrigerator that actually worked, and Mary's new shoes fit perfectly without any holes. Is this real? Mary asked one morning over actual breakfast, eggs and toast and orange juice. Or am I going to wake up back in the old apartment? It's real, baby, Billy said, though part of her still couldn't quite believe it either. Billy's first day at the Southside Community Outreach Center revealed that Harold's programs were not a front or a facade. They were legitimate, well-funded operations serving real needs. The food bank was stocked and organized, the after-school program had qualified teachers, and the job training center offered genuine certifications. But she also noticed the edges of Harold's other world, security men with guns positioned at entrances, conversations that stopped abruptly when she walked into certain rooms, coded phone calls Harold took with his back turned, his voice dropping to dangerous tones she'd heard that first night. Marcus, the wall of a man who'd been with Harold in the SUV, became a constant presence. He treated Billy with surprising respect, always nodding when she arrived, ensuring she had what she needed. The boss doesn't bring people into his personal spaces, Marcus told her one afternoon while walking her to her car. Not civilians, not people from outside the organization. You and your daughter being here, working here, living in housing he provides, that means something. It means he's paying back a debt, Billy said carefully. Marcus's expression suggested she was missing something important. The boss doesn't do guilt, Mrs. Smith. He does strategy. Think about what that means. Over the following weeks, Billy proved she hadn't lied about her competence. She reorganized the food bank distribution system, cutting waste and serving 30% more families. She improved the after-school program curriculum based on what she'd wished Mary had access to. She connected with community members who trusted her instantly because she'd lived in their shoes, scrubbed their floors, understood their struggles without judgment. Harold watched her work from a distance, appearing occasionally to review reports, his dark eyes assessing everything. Billy caught him observing her during a community meeting where she mediated a dispute between families over resource allocation, her natural authority and fairness evident. His expression revealed nothing, but Marcus later told her the boss had been impressed. 6 weeks in, Harold asked her to dinner to discuss expanding the programs. Billy hesitated, knowing that dinner with Harold Delgado meant stepping further into his complicated world, but she agreed. The restaurant was quiet and elegant, the kind of place where Billy would have once cleaned the bathrooms. Harold was already seated when she arrived, somehow looking both dangerous and civilized in a dark suit. "The programs are exceeding projections," he said after they'd ordered. "Your management has made a significant difference. I want to expand to 3 more neighborhoods, but I need to know you're committed long-term." "Why do you do this?" Billy asked instead of answering. "The community programs, the food banks. Why does a man like you care about people like us?" Harold was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass. "My daughter Elena was 14 when she died, caught in crossfire from a territorial dispute between my organization and a rival gang. A war I'd helped create, escalate, profit from." His voice was carefully controlled, but Billy heard the pain underneath. She was coming home from school. Wrong place, wrong time. A consequence of the world I'd built. Billy's breath caught. She'd heard the grief in his voice that first night, but seeing his face now, the carefully masked anguish, she understood the weight he carried. "The community programs are my penance," Harold continued. "An attempt to build something instead of destroy. To give other people's daughters chances Elena won't have. It doesn't balance the scales. Nothing can. But it's something." Billy saw him clearly then, not as the dangerous Mafia boss whose reputation preceded him, but as a father broken by loss, trying desperately to atone while still trapped in the violent world that had taken his child. "I'm committed," she said quietly. "To the programs, to the work, for as long as you'll have me." Something shifted in Harold's expression, the hard edges softening almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Mrs. Smith." "Billy," she corrected. "If we're going to work together long-term, you should call me Billy." "Billy," he repeated, and somehow her name in his voice sounded different than it ever had before. "Then you should call me Harold." In that moment, sitting across from this complicated, dangerous, grief-stricken man, Billy realized her world had shifted in ways she was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just a job. This was something deeper, more complex, and potentially far more dangerous than she'd imagined. But looking at Harold's face, seeing the genuine pain and hope warring in his expression, she knew she wasn't walking away. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Billy arrived at the Ashland Avenue Community Center at 7 a.m. to prepare for the morning food distribution and found the front windows shattered, glass covering the sidewalk like deadly snow. Her heart dropped as she pushed through the damaged door to find the interior destroyed. Shelves overturned, food supplies trampled and ruined, spray paint covering the walls in violent slashes of red and black. "Delgado's charity won't save you," was scrawled across the main wall in letters 3 feet high. The staff members who'd arrived early were huddled in the corner, shaking and terrified. Maria, the elderly woman who ran the breakfast program, had tears streaming down her face as she surveyed the destroyed kitchen. "They came around 3 a.m., Maria said, her voice breaking. 6 men. They broke everything. Said to tell Mr. Delgado that charity is weakness, and weakness gets you killed." Billy's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and called Harold's direct line, the number he'd given her for emergencies. "Billy?" His voice was immediately alert despite the early hour. What's wrong? Someone destroyed the Ashland Center. Completely destroyed it. Vandalized everything, ruined all the food supplies. Threatened the staff. Her voice was steadier than she felt. They left a message for you. Don't touch anything. I'm 12 minutes away. Harold arrived in 10 minutes with Marcus and a security team, followed immediately by a professional cleanup crew. His fury was evident in the tightness of his jaw and the dangerous coldness in his eyes as he surveyed the destruction, but his voice remained controlled when he spoke. Vincent Russo, he said quietly to Marcus. His signature is all over this. Who is Vincent Russo? Billy demanded. Harold turned to her, his expression grim. My longtime rival. He controls territory through predatory lending, protection rackets, fear. He keeps neighborhoods desperate so they depend on his services. Our community programs threaten that control by offering people real alternatives. His jaw tightened. This is my fault. Russo sees the programs as a threat to his empire. He wants me focused on our old conflicts, not on building legitimate operations. Billy looked at the destroyed center, at the terrified staff, at the families who would arrive in an hour expecting breakfast and finding only ruins. Anger burned through her fear. What can we do to protect the centers and the people we serve? Harold's eyes sharpened with something that looked like respect. You're not running? I'm asking what we can do to protect what we've built, Billy said firmly. Over the next 3 hours, Harold, Marcus, and Billy developed a security plan, armed guards at all centers, surveillance systems, secure supply chains, emergency protocols. The cleanup crew worked with remarkable efficiency, and by noon, the center was functional again, with emergency supplies Harold had sourced. That evening, Harold's phone rang while they were finalizing security details in his office. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening, and put it on speaker. Delgado, came a smooth, oily voice that made Billy's skin crawl. I hear you had some trouble at one of your little charity projects. Such a shame when good intentions meet reality. Russo, Harold said, his voice like ice, state your business. Your humanitarian project makes you soft, Delgado. That woman and her kid are making you weak. A man in our world can't afford weakness. You should remember what happens to weak men in our business. Harold's eyes met Billy's, something dangerous flickering in their depths. Touch them, Russo, and you'll discover exactly how weak I am. Test me on this, and you'll learn what real weakness looks like when I'm done with you. The line went dead. Harold stood and moved to the window, his shoulders tense. You and Mary are visible now, he said quietly. Russo knows you matter to me, which makes you leverage. I can have you and Mary relocated by tomorrow. New city, new identities. Enough money to start fresh somewhere safe. Somewhere Russo will never find you. Billy's first instinct was to accept, to grab Mary and run as far and fast as possible. But then she thought about Maria crying over the destroyed kitchen, about the families who depended on the food bank, about the kids in the after-school program who'd finally found a safe place to learn. No, she said firmly. Running means Russo wins and these programs shut down. Hundreds of families need what we're building. Those people don't have the option to run. Why should I? Harold turned from the window, his expression intense. Because you have a daughter who needs you alive. My daughter needs to see that her mother doesn't abandon people who depend on her, that we fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Billy lifted her chin. I'm not running, Harold, but I need you to teach me how to be smart about staying. For a long moment, Harold simply stared at her. Then slowly, something like admiration crossed his face. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish. Maybe both, Billy said. But I'm not running. Harold nodded slowly, a decision crystallizing in his eyes. Then we do this together. And we do it right. Over the following months, Billy transformed from an employee into something Harold hadn't anticipated, an indispensable partner. The community programs expanded from 3 centers to 7, serving over 2,000 families weekly. Billy's natural leadership and genuine understanding of poverty created trust that no amount of Harold's money could have bought. Mary thrived in ways that made Billy's heart ache with gratitude. She'd gained 20 pounds, made friends, joined the school choir, and started calling Harold Mr. H with easy affection that seemed to surprise him every time. One evening, Billy overheard Mary telling him about her science project, and Harold listened with the same focused attention he gave his business meetings, asking thoughtful questions that made Mary beam. "She's a smart kid," Harold said later, something wistful in his expression. "Elena would have liked her." Billy's network grew in unexpected ways. Former cleaning ladies from her old jobs, bus drivers who recognized her, grocery store workers who remembered serving her food stamps. They all became her eyes and ears. People who were invisible to men like Russo but saw everything, heard everything, and now reported back to Billy because they trusted her and believed in what the programs represented. Harold began seeking her counsel on decisions that had nothing to do with community outreach, strategic choices about territorial disputes, negotiations with city officials, even personnel decisions within his organization. He valued her moral compass and practical wisdom in ways that surprised them both. "You see angles I miss," he admitted one evening after she'd helped him navigate a complex situation with a city councilman. "You understand people in ways I've forgotten." The fundraiser for the after-school programs brought in over $200,000 from donors who saw genuine results. After the last guest left, Harold and Billy stood in the empty event space, exhausted but satisfied. "I haven't felt this hopeful in years," Harold said quietly, looking at the donation totals. "Maybe not since before Elena died. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" Billy asked. "Purpose beyond survival. A reason to build instead of just protect." His eyes met hers. "You've reminded me there's more to power than fear." Their relationship had shifted without either of them quite noticing when it happened. No longer employer and employee, but partners with shared purpose and mutual respect. Billy saw the man beneath the reputation, someone trapped by his past, haunted by his daughter's death, desperately trying to build a different future while still carrying the weight of who he'd been. But the peace was fragile. Marcus cornered Harold one afternoon while Billy was reviewing supply orders. "Russo's operations are suffering. People are choosing your food banks over his payday loans. Families are using your job training instead of his protection rackets. He's losing control." "Good," Harold said simply. "He's going to escalate," Marcus warned. "He needs you back in the old game, away from this community work. He'll force your hand." Harold's expression hardened. "Let him try." 2 weeks later, the escalation came. 3 of Russo's men arrived at the Englewood Center demanding protection money. Harold handled it personally, and Billy witnessed what she'd only heard about in whispers: Harold Delgado's capacity for controlled violence. It was over in 90 seconds. The 3 men left bloodied and terrified, carrying a message back to Russo. Harold's knuckles were split and bruising, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder. Billy found him in his car afterward, staring at his damaged hands with an expression that looked like self-loathing. She climbed into the passenger seat without asking permission and reached for his hands. "Let me see," she said quietly. Harold tried to pull away. "This is who I am, Billy. This darkness." "You should—" "I see who you were," Billy interrupted, cleaning the blood from his knuckles with surprising gentleness. "I see who you're trying to become. I choose to see both." Harold's eyes met hers, vulnerability showing through his carefully maintained control. "Both parts?" "Both parts," Billy confirmed. The man who uses violence to protect what matters, and the man who builds food banks so children don't go hungry. You're both, Harold, and I'm not running from either one. Something shifted between them in that moment, something that had been building for months but neither had acknowledged. Harold's hand cupped her face with surprising tenderness, his thumb brushing her cheek. You terrify me, he admitted quietly. You and Mary both. Caring about you makes me vulnerable in ways I haven't been in years. Good, Billy said, echoing his earlier words to Marcus. Vulnerability means you're still human, still capable of being more than what your reputation says you are. Harold leaned his forehead against hers, and in that moment, they weren't a mafia boss and a former cleaning lady. They were just two damaged people who'd found something unexpected in each other. Hope, purpose, and the beginning of something that looked dangerously like love. The call came at 2 a.m. The Roseland Community Center was on fire, flames visible from blocks away. By the time Harold, Marcus, and Billy arrived, firefighters were containing the blaze, but the building was a total loss. Security footage showed 3 men with gasoline cans and Molotov cocktails, their faces obscured, but their message clear. Russo, Marcus said, his voice flat with certainty. It didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, families who used the programs received threatening phone calls. Harold's legitimate businesses faced sudden health inspections, fire code violations, and zoning complaints that appeared out of nowhere. Russo was systematically attacking on every front, trying to force Harold back into open warfare and away from his community investments. Harold called an emergency meeting in his private office. His key lieutenants gathered around the conference table, hard men with harder reputations, all looking to their boss for direction. Billy sat quietly in the corner, there because Harold had insisted she needed to understand the full scope of the threat. Russo is escalating, Harold said, his voice controlled, but his fury evident. He's not going to stop until I respond with equivalent force or abandon the community programs. He wants war. Then we give him war, said Marcus, his tone matter-of-fact. We hit his operations, hard and fast, make him hurt until he backs off. Several men around the table nodded in agreement. But that means pulling back from the community work, another lieutenant said. Can't fight a war and run charity programs simultaneously. Resources have to focus. Harold's jaw tightened. Billy saw the conflict warring in his expression, the man he'd been versus the man he was trying to become. Returning to pure violence meant abandoning his path to redemption, but continuing the programs put innocent people at risk. If I may, Billy said quietly. The room went silent. Several men looked at her with barely concealed incredulity, a civilian woman, offering tactical advice to Harold Delgado's inner circle. But Harold nodded. Speak. Billy stood, moving to the table with confidence she'd learned from months of running programs under impossible conditions. Russo wants us afraid. He wants the community to see that hope doesn't last, that men like him always win. If we shut down the programs now, we prove him right. Hundreds of families lose the only support they have, and Russo demonstrates that kindness is weakness. And your alternative? Marcus asked, his tone respectful despite his skepticism. Intelligence, Billy said simply. I've built a network over these months. Former cleaning ladies, bus drivers, grocery store workers, waitresses, janitors. People Russo doesn't see because he's spent his career treating them like they're invisible. But they see everything. They hear everything. They know his patterns, his properties, his people. She pulled out a folder she'd prepared, spreading documents across the table. In the past week alone, my network has identified 3 of Russo's storage facilities, 2 properties where he conducts his payday lending operations, and a pattern in his collection routes. They've observed weakening loyalty among his own people, who are tired of his methods and see what we're building as an alternative. The room was completely silent now, hard men staring at the intelligence that a network of invisible people had gathered. We maintain visible commitment to the programs, Billy continued. We show the community that we don't back down from bullies. Meanwhile, we use what my network provides to hit Russo where he's actually vulnerable: his money, his operations, his reputation. We dismantle him systematically, not with a war, but with strategy. Harold's eyes held hers across the table, something like pride and admiration in his expression. You've thought this through. I've lived in neighborhoods Russo exploits my entire life, Billy said quietly. I know how his power works, and I know it's built on fear of consequences that never actually come. People are ready to stop being afraid. They just need to see that standing up to him is possible. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow smile crossing his face. The boss has been telling us for months that Ms. Smith sees angles we miss. I'm starting to understand what he means. Harold looked around the table at his men. We try Billy's approach. Marcus, coordinate with her network for intelligence gathering. We maintain full operations at all community centers with increased but subtle security. No pulling back, no showing weakness, and we use what Billy's people provide to systematically dismantle Russo's infrastructure. Over the next 3 weeks, Billy's network proved devastatingly effective. Information flowed constantly. Russo's cash storage locations, his meeting schedules, his vulnerable supply chains. Harold's organization moved with surgical precision, hitting Russo's operations without the spectacle of open warfare. And the community responded. Families kept coming to the centers. People chose Harold's food banks over Russo's predatory loans. The network grew stronger as more people saw that standing with Harold meant safety, opportunity, and genuine support. One evening, reviewing the latest intelligence reports, Harold shook his head in amazement. You've created something I've been trying to build for 5 years, real power through connection and trust. Something more sustainable than fear. Fear only lasts as long as you can maintain the threats, Billy said. Trust lasts because people choose it. Harold's hand found hers across the desk. You're extraordinary. You know that? Billy smiled, but her expression grew serious. Russo's going to realize what we're doing. When he does, he'll come after the source. He'll come after me. I know, Harold said quietly, his grip tightening, which is why I'm not letting you out of my sight. The call from Mary's school came at 2:15 p.m. Mrs. Smith, we're just confirming that Mary left with your authorized pickup at 1:30. We wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. Billy's blood turned to ice. What authorized pickup? I didn't send anyone. The silence on the other end was deafening. 2 men arrived with proper identification showing they were from your employer's security team. They had the correct pickup code and... Billy hung up, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Before she could call Harold, it rang again. Unknown number. Ms. Smith. The oily voice from weeks ago. Vincent Russo. Your daughter is safe for now, comfortable even. Whether she stays that way depends entirely on Harold Delgado's next choices. If you hurt her... Billy's voice broke on rage and terror. I have no desire to hurt a child, Russo interrupted smoothly. But I will if necessary. Tell Delgado to shut down all those cute community programs immediately. Return to our traditional business arrangements and stay in his lane. He has 24 hours. If I see any police involvement or unusual movement from his security forces, the girl dies. Are we clear? Crystal, Billy managed through clenched teeth. Good. I'll be in touch with location details for the exchange. Just you, Delgado, and his precious community programs for your daughter. Seems like a fair trade. The line went dead. Billy called Harold, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Russo, has Mary. Harold arrived at her apartment in 8 minutes, Marcus and 2 other men with him. Billy was pacing, her mind racing through options, forcing down the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "We mobilize everyone," Harold said immediately, his voice cold with lethal intent. "Every man, every resource. We tear this city apart until—" "That's exactly what he expects," Billy interrupted, her strategic mind overriding her maternal terror. "He'll have surveillance on your organization. The moment he sees you mobilizing for war, he'll move Mary. We'll lose any chance of finding her." Harold's jaw tightened, but he recognized the logic. "Then what do you suggest?" Billy pulled out her phone, scrolling through recent messages from her network. 3 days ago, Carmen, one of the cleaning ladies who works the industrial district, mentioned seeing unusual activity at the old Perez factory on 63rd. Said Russo's men were there at odd hours, moving supplies. She thought it was strange because that building's been abandoned for years. "Russo wouldn't use an active location," Marcus said thoughtfully. "He'd want something off everyone's radar, somewhere he thinks we wouldn't look." Harold made a quick call. "I'm sending someone to scout it, discreetly." 30 minutes later, the scout confirmed it. Security on an abandoned building, vehicles coming and going, and what looked like a makeshift holding area in the basement. "We go in fast and hard," Marcus said. "Full tactical team." "No," Billy and Harold said simultaneously. "Russo will have contingencies," Harold explained. "Lookouts watching for exactly that kind of approach. We need to be smarter." "You create the appearance of preparing for war," Billy said, the plan crystallizing in her mind. "Keep Russo's attention on your main forces. Make him think you're doing exactly what he expects. Meanwhile, you and I go to the factory with only Marcus and 2 men you trust absolutely. Small team, unexpected approach." "You're not going," Harold said flatly. "I absolutely am," Billy countered, her voice steel. "Mary will be terrified. She needs to see me. And I'm not sitting here helpless while my daughter is in danger. It's too dangerous. My daughter is already in danger because of her connection to me. To us. I'm not hiding while someone else rescues her." Billy met his eyes with absolute determination. "I'm coming, Harold. You can argue with me and waste time, or you can accept it and plan accordingly." Harold stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You stay behind me at all times. You do exactly what Marcus tells you. No heroics." "No heroics," Billy agreed. They planned carefully. Harold made very visible preparations, mobilizing his forces, creating the impression of imminent war. Russo's surveillance would report exactly what he expected to see. Meanwhile, at 4 a.m., Harold, Billy, Marcus, and 2 trusted men approached the factory using a route Billy's network had identified. A service road that had been forgotten when the factory closed. No surveillance, no clear sight lines from Russo's positions. Billy wore dark clothes Marcus had provided, her heart hammering but her mind clear. Mary was in that building, terrified and alone, and Billy would walk through fire to get her back. As they moved silently through the pre-dawn darkness, Harold's hand briefly squeezed hers. "We get her back," he promised quietly. "Whatever it takes." Billy nodded, checking the small canister of pepper spray Marcus had insisted she carry. She wasn't helpless anymore. She wasn't invisible. And she was about to show Vincent Russo exactly what kind of power a mother's love could wield. They reached the factory perimeter as the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. Inside that building was her daughter, and Billy would tear down every wall to reach her. The factory's interior was a maze of shadows and decay, rusted machinery casting eerie silhouettes in the dim pre-dawn light, filtering through broken windows. Harold moved with lethal precision, Marcus flanking him, while Billy followed exactly as instructed, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Two of Harold's men had split off to cover alternate entrances, communicating through silent hand signals that spoke of years of coordinated operations. They encountered the first guard on the second-floor catwalk. Marcus handled it with brutal efficiency, the man unconscious before he could raise an alarm. The second guard met the same fate near what had once been the factory's administrative offices. Harold's movements were controlled violence, each action calculated and precise, and Billy saw firsthand the dangerous man beneath the community builder she'd come to know. But it was too easy. Too clean. Harold sensed it the same moment she did, his hand going up to signal a stop. "It's a trap," he whispered. "He's been waiting for us." They descended to the main factory floor, a cavernous space where assembly lines had once run 24 hours a day. Lights suddenly blazed on, temporarily blinding them, and when Billy's vision cleared, her heart stopped. Mary sat in a chair in the center of the empty floor, her hands bound, her face streaked with tears but otherwise unharmed. Vincent Russo stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder, the other holding a gun pointed at her head. 6 armed men ringed the perimeter, weapons trained on the entrances. "Right on schedule, Delgado," Russo said, his oily voice echoing in the vast space. "I knew your newfound softness would make you predictable. This is what caring about people gets you in our world. Leverage against you." The great Harold Delgado, brought to his knees by a cleaning lady and her brat. Harold's hand shot out, stopping Billy from moving forward. But she pushed past him anyway, stepping into the open space with a calmness that surprised even herself. "You're wrong, Mr. Russo," she said clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You think caring makes us weak? You've built your entire empire on fear, on keeping people desperate and dependent. But look at your own men. Really look at them." Russo's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What game are you playing, woman?" "No game. Just truth." Billy's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of Russo's guards. "How many of you are here out of loyalty versus fear? How many of you have families who use the food banks Harold provides? How many are exhausted from maintaining an empire built on suffering?" She saw it. The flicker of uncertainty in several faces, the way grips on weapons loosened almost imperceptibly. "Harold's programs have shown people there's another way to live," Billy continued, her voice gaining strength. "You took my daughter thinking we'd collapse, that we'd abandon everything we've built. But you miscalculated. You underestimated what happens when people stop being afraid." "Touching speech," Russo snarled. "But you're still surrounded and your daughter still has a gun to her head." "Am I surrounded?" Billy asked quietly. "Listen." In the silence that followed, they all heard it. The sound of vehicles pulling up outside, car doors closing, voices calling out to each other. Not Harold's security forces. Something different. Something Russo hadn't anticipated. Billy had sent a single coded text before they'd entered the factory. A message to 3 people in her network who'd understood exactly what it meant. Within 30 minutes, dozens of community members had mobilized. Former cleaning ladies, bus drivers, grocery store workers, families who used the programs. People Russo had spent his career treating as invisible and beneath notice. "Right now, Mr. Russo, this building is surrounded by people who've stopped being afraid of you," Billy said. "People who've seen that Harold's way works better than yours. Your power was built on isolation and fear, but we've built something stronger: community, connection, hope." She saw it spreading through Russo's men. Doubt, uncertainty, the realization that they were outnumbered not by soldiers, but by the very people they'd been oppressing. In that split second of distraction, Harold moved. His training made him faster than thought itself. He closed the distance to Russo, disarming the guard holding Mary with a precision strike that dropped the man instantly. Marcus and his men moved simultaneously, weapons trained on Russo's guards who suddenly seemed far less certain about their loyalty. Mary broke free, running to Billy, who caught her daughter and held her tight, never breaking eye contact with Russo. "This is what real power looks like," Billy told him, her voice quiet but carrying absolute conviction. Not fear, not control, connection, trust. People choosing to stand together because they believe in something better. Russo stared at her, his empire crumbling in real time, and for the first time, Billy saw genuine fear in his eyes. Russo's empire collapsed with shocking speed once the foundation cracked. Within 48 hours, 6 of his top lieutenants had either disappeared or approached Harold's organization seeking new arrangements. The community members who'd surrounded the factory had recorded everything on their phones, providing law enforcement with documentation of Russo's operation, his threats, his crimes. For years, prosecutors had struggled to build cases against him because witnesses were too terrified to come forward. But Billy's network had changed that calculus. When dozens of ordinary people stepped forward simultaneously, their collective testimony became unassailable. Mary spent 3 days in the hospital under observation, more for psychological support than physical injury. Her room overflowed with flowers, cards, and small gifts from families whose lives the programs had touched. Children from the after-school program made a banner reading, "We love you, Mary," with handprints in every color. Elderly women from the food bank knitted her a blanket. Bus drivers who'd heard the story dropped off stuffed animals. "I've never felt so seen," Mary said quietly one evening, looking at the overwhelming display of community love. Harold sat with Billy during those long hospital hours, his presence constant and reassuring. On the second night, when Mary was finally sleeping peacefully, he spoke words that had clearly been weighing on him. "I started those programs as penance," he admitted, his voice low, "as a way to balance the scales for my daughter's death. I threw money at problems, hired competent people, checked boxes that made me feel like I was doing something meaningful, but it was all surface level, transactional." Billy waited, knowing he needed to finish. "You transformed them into something real," Harold continued. "You saw people I'd been writing checks for but never actually seeing. You empowered them, trusted them, built networks based on genuine connection rather than charity. You showed me that redemption isn't about giving money to ease your guilt. It's about actually seeing people and believing they have power worth investing in." Billy reached for his hand, her fingers threading through his. "You gave me and Mary a chance when we had nothing. You trusted me with real responsibility when every other employer saw me as disposable labor. You let me transform your programs instead of micromanaging every decision." She met his eyes. "We both saved each other, Harold. That's what this has been from the beginning. Mutual salvation." 3 months later, the new community center opened on a perfect spring morning. The building was the largest yet, with a full commercial kitchen for the food bank, classrooms for job training, a medical clinic staffed by volunteer doctors, and a library donated by a publisher who'd read about the programs in the newspaper. Above the entrance, letters in polished bronze read, "Elena Delgado Community Center." Hundreds of people filled the space for the opening ceremony. Billy stood at the podium, looking out at faces she knew. Maria from the breakfast program, Carmen who'd provided the crucial intelligence about the factory, bus drivers and cleaning ladies and grocery store workers who formed the invisible infrastructure that had changed everything. 3 months ago, I was invisible, Billy began, her voice steady and clear. I cleaned offices while people walked past me without seeing. I scrubbed floors and emptied trash and made spaces beautiful for others to enjoy. And to most of the world, I didn't exist as a full person. I was just part of the furniture. She saw people nodding, recognizing their own experiences in her words. Desperation taught me pride is a luxury, she continued. When my daughter collapsed on a frozen street and I accidentally called the wrong number, I had to make a choice. Let pride keep me helpless, or accept help from an unlikely source and see where it led. Billy's eyes found Harold standing at the side of the stage, his expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know him. But she saw it. Peace. Maybe even something close to happiness, softening the hard edges that had defined him for so long. That misdial changed everything, Billy said. It connected two people who should never have met, who came from completely different worlds, who had every reason not to trust each other. But we chose to see each other as fully human, complex, capable of change, and that choice created something neither of us could have built alone. The applause was thunderous. Mary, healthy and confident now, her cheeks full and her eyes bright, beamed from the front row. After the ceremony, as people mingled and explored the new space, Mary tugged on Billy's sleeve. "Mom, is Mr. H coming to my school play next week? I'm the narrator, and I want him to hear my part." Billy looked at Harold, who was being thanked by an elderly man whose grandson had gotten his first real job through the training program. This dangerous man, this former symbol of everything she'd been taught to fear, had become family in ways she couldn't have imagined that frozen night when desperation had made her brave enough to ask for help. She reached for Harold's hand when he returned to her side, the gesture unconscious now, natural, a physical manifestation of the connection they'd built through crisis and trust, and choosing to see each other's full humanity. "Yes, sweetheart," Billy answered her daughter, her heart full in ways she'd thought impossible when she'd been scrubbing floors for $42 a night. "He'll be there. He always is." Harold squeezed her hand gently, and in that moment, surrounded by the community they'd built together, Billy understood that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a practice, a daily choice to see people, to build instead of destroy, to believe that even the most unlikely connections could create the most profound transformations. Sometimes a wrong number is exactly the right call. From a frozen street where a mother found her dying daughter to a community center named after hope itself, Billy and Harold's story reminds us that one moment of desperate courage can change everything. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe.